So we have 7 members on. We can start if we want. Do we want to wait a few more minutes or get going?
If you're ready, Jay, I can start it.
Can you hold on a minute? Andrew, can we promote Vivian and Andy to panelists? For some reason, they don't have the panelist link.
Are they any attendees?
They should be.
So yeah, I won't see them until we go live, and I can bring them over.
Oh, got it. Yeah, I got a text from Ruth Tremarky saying that the link's not working. I'm assuming that's because we haven't started the meeting yet, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Why don't we start it then?
Okay, here we go.
Recording in progress.
Okay, it is 6:01. Welcome. We're going to kick off the EFPBC meeting for tonight. We have a tight agenda. Everything's laid out, and hopefully it can stay somewhat on schedule. So like I said, call to order at 6:01. And we have a few companies in here. We're waiting for Hill to come on, but we have representatives from TAP-A, Chris and Charlie. Charlie, do you want to give a little introduction?
Sure. I think everyone knows this at this point, but Charlie Hay and Chris Blesson from TAP-A Architects were the architects for the project, and we'll be presenting the PSR options tonight.
We have a lot of new people from the public on tonight, so
Okay.
just wanted to get everyone on there.
Okay.
And we're waiting for Vivian to jump on from Hill.
And Jay, I just threw up the agenda there if you want to go through it.
Yep. I have my copy up also. So why don't we jump, Vivian and Andy is still trying to get on, and we can go right to the meeting minutes. Is Dawn on? I can't see if Dawn's on. No. Chris, do you want to take care of approving the meeting minutes?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to make a motion. So we have 2 outstanding sets of minutes that we members got separate emails from Dawn on. The first was November 13th. The second was our last meeting. That was December 20th. The only edit I had was on page 2. The note said that Mr. Hay presented preliminary plans to the school committee, and that was program, not plans. And I reviewed that with Dawn. He's already made that change. That was all I had.
Okay. We need a vote. That's a motion to approve.
So I'm happy to make a motion to approve the minutes of December 13th as amended and the minutes of December 20th as submitted by Dawn.
Can we get a second?
Second.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we need a roll call vote. So Frank?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Todd?
Aye.
Keith already did. Colleen?
Aye.
And Chris, all right. So we're all in favor. So motion moved. Approved. So meeting minutes, I guess.
Can you bear with me? I just, Dawn just sent me a text. We also need to approve the minutes from the 29th. At the 29th, we approved a big tranche of minutes. It doesn't look like we actually approved the minutes of the 29th.
Okay. Do you have that list in front of you? You want me to read it?
So we we approved on the 29th. He sent like 5 or 6 sets. So we went through all of those. It was actually that meeting that we never actually approved. So all we need to do in addition to the minutes we just approved are the minutes from November 29th.
Okay. So
moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, Mark. Okay, another roll call vote is Frank,
Aye.
Brian, Todd,
Aye.
Geetha, Colleen,
Aye.
and Chris already moved. All right.
And Don's here. I vote yes.
Okay, Don, I got you now.
And this is Lisa. I vote yes as well.
All right, Lisa, I didn't see you come on.
I'm on as well. It's fine. John.
Gotcha.
And Jay, I just want to pause for a moment. Did we find Vivian? Oh, good. We have Vivian and Andy with us. Good. I want to be sure we're not
Okay.
missing anybody before we move on.
Welcome, Vivian. You want a little introduction to anyone that might be new?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. Vivian Barbedian, accompanied with Andy Vo from Hill International. We're the owner's project management firm selected by the town of Winchester to assist in coordinating the Lynch Elementary School, as well as correspondence with the MSBA, being the Massachusetts School Building Authority that Winchester has partnered with in order to have this project come to fruition.
Thank you. So we're going to jump right into Lynch Elementary now, and I'll turn it over to Charlie.
Or do we want to do the website first?
Sure. That's
Let's see, I
fine.
want to be sure.
I just follow my notes, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, let me. Yeah, forgive me, Jay. We actually, we have a procedural matter, which is the PDP authorization.
Right.
I wonder if maybe Vivian or Andy or Charlie could just take a moment to describe. I mean, the EFPBC knows what it is, but for those members of the public watching, if we could just get a brief description of what the PDP is and what it isn't.
Sure, I can begin. And Charlie, if you wouldn't mind jumping in, if I miss anything, that would be great. So the PDP is the preliminary design submission to the MSBA. This is the first of many milestones that we will be reaching on the project and submitting to the MSBA on behalf of the town of Winchester for the Lynch Elementary School project. Generally, the PDP has starting off with a brief introduction of the project, as well as an initial space summary. And accompanied to that initial space summary is the educational plan worked and derived by the superintendent. We also include a evaluation of existing conditions, doing a lot of surveys, making sure that we understand the site and the site development requirements. It also includes any local action items, such as that the town rightfully owns the parcel of land that we are anticipating building or renovating or adding on to the Lynch Elementary School project. Anything else, Charlie, you might want to add?
No, that was great. No, it's really the existing conditions phase and the educational visioning phase of the project, really.
And so, Jay, we have the team has a deadline, the MSBA, and I know there are probably a few panelists, attendees. We have over 60 attendees tonight, which is fantastic. So thank you all for being here and for watching. But as it was introduced at our kickoff meeting on November 16th, some of these key dates are set by the MSBA, and that includes a filing for the preliminary design program that's due on January 18th. And so to sort of put that together, our design and management team needs us to authorize Hill International tonight to kind of pull all that together and transmit it. I think all the stuff that goes into the PDP, the EFPBC has seen. So it's really just about putting it together and transmitting it. And if it's okay with you, Jay, I would move to authorize Project OPM Hill International to submit on behalf of the EFPBC, the preliminary design program, or the PDP package to the Massachusetts School Building Authority no later than July 18th, 2022, as required.
Okay, second.
January 18th? Is it January 18th? Sorry.
Yes, January 18th.
Yes. Do we know when can we expect the comments back from MSBA on the preliminary design program options?
The MSBA typically takes somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks
Okay,
for review and comments.
okay.
But as soon as I can't give you an exact date of when they will get to ours and when they'll provide the comments, but typically they stay true to that schedule. As soon as we receive them, we will circulate and respond accordingly.
Okay.
I'd like to second Chris's motion.
Thank you, Brian. All right, we'll get a roll call vote. Frank?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
Aye. Brian did already.
Aye.
Todd?
Aye.
Geetha?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Colleen?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Okay, all in favor? We're all
Thank you,
set.
everyone.
Back to the agenda.
So Jay, you want me to throw up the website now?
Yes, please. That's next. Yep.
Okay, so I'm really pleased to share with the public tonight. Our communications team has put together a project website for the new Lynch. You can find it. It's live. If you go to lynch2025.com, this will be, we hope, a landing pad for all kinds of information on the project. I'm going to walk everybody through it real quick, but just recognition, Deb DePeter, former Lynch LPA president, is on our communications team. Tom Hopcroft, my colleague on school committee, and Lisa Matrandola, who of course is an EFPBC member and she's chair of the Disability Access Commission. Right off the bat, we are an evolving demographic in Winchester, and English is not a primary language in every household. So we do have some translation tools here initially set up for Portuguese, Chinese, and Spanish. If there are any particular requests, please let us know, and we will be happy to accommodate you and expand that over time. Very quickly, the homepage is simply a greeting, tells you you've arrived. It also directs the public to this email address, lynch2025FAQ@gmail.com. If you send email questions or feedback to this address, the communications team will receive that, and we'll be reviewing these questions pretty much on a weekly basis. And as you'll see in a few minutes, we will circle back with the FAQ page to provide answers or clarification when and where we can. Very brief description of the project and our partner in the State School Building Authority, as well as some of the requirements that the MSBA has us look at. I think many of us in town maybe already envision when we say the new Lynch is a new freestanding building. But the MSBA actually requires us to study multiple options, and that includes a renovation and addition onto the existing, partial demo, new build, kind of like what we did at Winchester High School. We have some options that look at a new freestanding school, which is what we did at Vincent Owen, multiple site options for all of these, multiple phasing options for all of these. On the homepage, we're going to try to keep current with what's new. Some images here. We had Weston and Sampson and a drilling rig on site earlier in December doing some soil samples. And we'll have a color banner here in terms of the immediate next steps. That'll change obviously pretty frequently. And we have a summary here on schedule, which I'm going to come back to. This is where I'm going to wrap up tonight, and that'll be the segue for Chris and Charlie to begin their presentation. So I'll come back to that in a moment. We have some subpages. For those who are interested in knowing more about the MSBA, who they are, and our history with them, you can visit this page. It describes our really constructive working relationship with them on the VO school and the high school. Those were both new builds. And then, of course, at Lynch, we've actually worked with them on much smaller projects like a roof replacement. Some history here about how we actually came to this timeline are 3 statements of interest that were submitted for both Lynch and Morocco. And for those who really want a big picture, some links here to our 10-year school facilities master plan and enrollment report from the UMass Donahue Institute. The MSBA banner at the bottom is actually a link. If you click on that, it will take you directly to the MSBA's Lynch project page. So you can enjoy all sorts of detail there if you're interested. We next have a page that describes what Lynch is today. It was designed as a junior high school from the very beginning in 1960. So a description of really how the current school was intended, its size, its overall condition with respect to the building and building systems. We also briefly described some of the program shortcomings that we have at Lynch, most importantly because it was never designed as an elementary school to begin with. This is an interesting page I think that many people will be interested in. That is the site. It is a large but complicated site. We're, of course, adjacent to Horn Pond Brook Parkway. We have setbacks required because of the floodway and the floodplain conservation issues and restrictions here. And then really the elephant in the room is this huge chunk of the site that's really not ours. This is not school department property. What you see labeled water department land, in fact, was a well field that was built in the early 1930s in Winchester and was used until the late 1950s until we submitted an agreement with the MWRA. So it's not our land, but our TAP A design team has determined pretty quickly if this were our land, if it was our land, it might present some unique planning opportunities. And so for the public who didn't already know, at the last EFPBC meeting on December 20th, the committee formally requested the school committee to explore a land transfer agreement with the select board, under whose authority this land sits today, even though it's an abandoned well field. There's 25 or 26 abandoned drinking water wells on this property. The school committee heard that request. We've discussed it, and we look forward in the next couple of weeks to having that conversation with town management and the select board. That'll be important for us moving forward. If there is ultimately a preferred scheme, and Charlie will certainly dwell on this maybe a little bit more in the presentation tonight, if there is a preferred scheme for the new Lynch that in any way relies on that land, it needs to be our land by the time the board votes the approved preferred schematic in September. And the final step in making that land transfer involves town meeting. So this is going to be very quickly a critical path item that may come before spring town meeting. For those who live in the Lynch neighborhood and care to go looking for it, the foundation of the old pump house is still there today in the woods. And I think we will just continue to update this blue field with time when we have more information on how the conversation is going with respect to land transfer. Then we're going to go to a design page. This obviously a lot of information yet to be posted because we're only just coming out of the starting blocks with TAP A. But here you kind of see again a reframing of some of the conceptual design ideals the MSBA is looking for, some of the key metrics that we'll be evaluating as we consider these different options. And then we also described some of the key project goals that were actually published in the project RFP. That includes our recognition of Winchester's climate action plan. It was adopted back in 2020, and the school committee certainly is expecting a LEED certified building. So that's important to us as well. But look for much more information here on the design page. There's been much conversation about swing space for the Lynch project. Swing space is just temporary space that accommodates students during construction. So here you see a description of what the short and long-term benefits of swing space can be. We have a little history page here about how swing space has been used on all three of the last major school reconstruction projects. With swing space, we actually moved the students from the Lincoln, Ambrose, and VO schools completely off-site for construction. And then inevitably, we often get questions from the community, what and where is Parkhurst, which comes up in conversation as a potential swing space destination. So some history here about that building, as well as some language about our future traffic and safety concerns when the project moves forward. We do have a cost page. Not a whole lot of detail here yet, because as I said, we're just getting out of the blocks here on planning and design. But you do find here kind of a distinction between construction cost, project cost, MSBA reimbursement rate, which of course drives a net project cost. Things like the bonding terms, the length and the rate will of course affect what we ultimately see in our tax bills, coupled with our assessment. There is some information here for folks who are interested. We do have some early ideas about construction cost, not project cost, and that's just based on the space program that the school committee voted last month. But that's not based on any particular building design. And Charlie, I'm sure would sort of reinforce this point tonight. But we're estimating a project cost right now based on what we know, which is not a great deal, of something between $50 and $54 million. That's unreimbursed. I'm almost done here. We're going to have a presentations page. Not a lot here, but tonight, WinCam is actually recording this meeting. They're also broadcasting right now, so I thank them for that. WinCam recordings of some of our key meetings are going to be linked on this page, as well as some key documents. So this was our slide deck from the kickoff on the 16th. And Andy, our project manager from Hill, kept notes on some public feedback from our session at Winchester High School that evening. So folks can kind of look here for key documents to continue to populate. We'll have a link here. Any news articles on the project can have a place to sort of reside. And then here's a question that inevitably comes up when we talk about Lynch, and that is, what about Morocco? And as I'm sure I know the EFPBC knows this, but hopefully most of our visitors tonight from the public know that in the spring of ballot question 1, voters not unanimously, but very strongly supported a $3.6 million investment in Morocco to extend the life of that building until we can just replace it completely. And we're estimating sometime between 2028 and 2030. So we've not forgotten about Morocco. There's some history here about our attempts to partner with the MSBA. And if folks want to see the presentation and kind of the intent behind some of those investments, there's a link to those presentations to town meeting as well. So I mentioned at the outset an email address folks can use. We have an FAQ webpage. And I think that every couple of weeks, you can expect to see some updates here. We're going to be paying close attention tonight when we get to the public Q&A, which is going to be in a written format. As I said, we're recording all this, so make every effort to answer questions tonight and also record those for posterity here on the webpage. So having said all that, I'm going to wrap up where I started. The project schedule, this was shared with the school committee, and I believe Ms. Rudolph has shared this with the select board as well. We kicked off tonight with this authorization for the PDP, which goes into the MSBA on January 18th. Following that, the preferred schematic report, which will include kind of a preferred design option. We have a facilities assessment subcommittee review later in March, board of directors meeting, and then clearing that, a preferred schematic approval and subsequent schematic design. At the end of the day, what we're really looking to do is bring to fall town meeting a project funding request, have that be approved, and then go to the voters in January of 2023 with a debt exclusion override for the new Lynch. And certainly long before then, we'll have a better sense of what Lynch looks like and what the project cost will be and what the reimbursement rates will be. So that's a mouthful. You can catch this at lynch2025.com, and just know that we'll be updating this from time to time when we get new information. Thank you, Jay.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Well done. And we're going to move on to Charlie and his team for what we've been waiting for, the designs, conceptual designs.
And Charlie,
Thank you.
If you're not able to share, just let us know.
Well, so thanks very much. Chris is actually going to walk through the presentation with you. We've added some sort of development to the some of the options around site planning and around massing. These continue to be conceptual diagrams only, as we talked about. As everyone on the committee knows, we've already advanced certain selected options to the next phase and dropped other ones that are no longer going to be under consideration during the PSR phase. And for anyone at home who's listening, as we talked about, the PDP is really about envisioning and existing conditions verification, and then beginning to talk about conceptual approaches to design. The preferred schematic report, which is the next phase, will ultimately, as Chris said, advance a preferred option. And what the MSBA asks us for ultimately will be three options. One will be replacement, one will be addition renovation, and one will be renovation only. And those three will make up the PSR submission. But even with those three, one of those three will be advanced as the preferred option for the district. So tonight you will see a slightly more developed version of what you saw a couple of weeks ago for the people who've already seen it. And this is what will go into the PDP. So Chris, you want to walk everybody through this? And I think we won't toggle back and forth between phasing and design as much as we did last time. I think Chris will focus more on the design piece of it and less on the phasing piece of it.
Everybody see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So as Charlie mentioned, we have, since the last meeting, this is the slide showing all of the options that we've been exploring. The renovation option being one that we need to complete for this phase and carry forward into the PSR. And the same with the addition renovation. So we've had a preliminary conversation about getting rid of AR1. And then we had 7 new school schemes, and 4 of those have been, I guess there's only 6, and one of them had 2 different phasing ways to do it. And so N1, N3, and N7 have been previously discussed as being taken off the table. But I'll go through all of them now and end up at the end, and we can have a more robust conversation about any more fine tuning. So I wanted to start again, you saw this graphic on the website, but again, just reminding people of the complexities related to this site. And as Chris Nixon mentioned, it is a large site, but there's a lot of constraints to it in terms of the wellheads and the water department land. And then most importantly, the floodplains and the release zones from the water management system. So, and then the Horn Pond Brook setbacks. And so all of that creates quite small areas where you can build into, and that's what this slide was really meant to highlight. And this takes that and kind of turns it up a little bit so that you can see it in an axon kind of way, 3-dimensional type of view. And on the top there is a site section to show you how much the topography changes through the site. And so probably not surprising to most of you who live in the area, but again, it's worth reminding that that the site has a particular amount of constraints to it, and the survey team's out there right now investigating that and trying to get some more info to add to the PDP submission. So the first option was the renovation option here. And what you see that we've added to these is primarily in the sort of middle column, if you will, between the image and the description on the right, is on the ones we carried forward from the last meeting, we started to add in a first floor concept idea where you can kind of see what the first floor is doing. Obviously, right now is not the critical moment to be talking really heavily through architecture or arrangement, as we've just started to touch the iceberg on those ideas, and we'll have more to talk about at the next meeting, I think, in terms of education and how these buildings, these different schemes lay out. But for now, we're just sort of talking about first floor concept and the way that builds, because it has implications for the grades, the grade configuration, which is the second note down below the floor concept. And so in reality, the renovation scheme, as one might expect, is that it produces no change to how the building is configured currently. And so this is that option, and I'll just keep going here and show you the site plan is going to be the same. And just to remember that this project requires that it be done all in one go in one phase, and which means this entire school would be in swing space for the entire duration of construction. So, and then there's that 3D perspective. So this was AR1, the addition renovation, and this is the one that we had previously determined would drop off the list. And I think it was mostly because of the vast disruption to the building and to the use of the building and to the simultaneous construction and use. So it disrupts the site a little bit more than AR2. And so during construction, and so we have taken this off the plan. The committee removed it from consideration on the last one to favor.
Can I stop you just for a second? There's a gray box on the right-hand side of the screen. I don't know whether you can remove it or not, but it's blocking some of the text.
Okay, is that helpful?
It's still there for me. Oh, there's gone. And there's one at the bottom too, but.
Yeah, let me see if I can get rid of that. These are the controls for Zoom. I don't know. I could move it. I'm afraid to click buttons there, so I'll probably leave the meeting.
That is substantially out of the way, though. What you just did was really helpful.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And Chris, with that interruption, you might
better
just
the top, maybe. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah, can you just maybe also just clarify for folks watching when we see notes like, possibly no swing space required, that was an option. I think there were two others like that. Those are not 2025 completions. Those were some options that we're going to take an entire other year, right? So I think that was something the EFPBC wasn't really interested in going out to 2026. 2025 is a goal that we all want to pull for.
Right, correct. So you'll notice that the duration extends if we don't do swing space or get aggressive on how we plan these things out. Okay, so I'm sorry. Let me go back here. Yeah. Okay. So AR2 is where we were now, and so this is another one where we were contemplating that the swing space is required, but remember that the MSBA requires that we carry forward an addition renovation option. And so out of the two addition renovation options we moved forward, this is the one that seemed more advantageous than the other one. And mostly I think because it's only adding the pre-K wing out into the north of the building, sort of where the playground is right now. And so that is a sort of smaller addition, but then a major renovation to the rest of the building. So it's a little bit more tidy in terms of how it would work and not have to be a ton of phases, as in the last one was AR1 had a bunch of phases in it to be able to complete and swing kids around. And so this would be a new one-story pre-K wing, and really all the grades would be on the first floor. And the biggest thing here is that you're bringing the entire pre-K and all of the classrooms that the ed program now dictates into the building with all the other grades that are there now.
So let me just interrupt briefly, just in case anybody is scratching their heads at home. We would have probably one grade on the lower level ultimately. So we'd have to add an elevator and have one, 4 classrooms in the lower level. So most of the grades are on one floor, but we're still assuming we're using all of the existing space in this building.
And then the phases are as following. And so as Chris Nixon denoted, that this you would be able to move some kids in 2025, but most of it's going to come back in 2026 when the new building would be complete. And so there is some overlapping work here. There's some nuance to phasing the kids in and out of classrooms and swing space, but this would be considered a fairly significant disruption to school if the site is still occupied. So this is a site plan kind of showing what that renovation addition might look like for this option. And so again, similar circulation to what you have now. We would have to move pre-K play and another play area off to the sort of northwest side of the building. But for all intents and purposes, the site circulation remains much the same as what you have experienced today. And the rest of the site would try to be updated to take advantage of some of the nature trails and context of the natural environment around the building.
One of the concerns with this one potentially is the landscape architect did feel like buses would be better served coming in from the Hornbrook roadside, the Horn Pond to Brook roadside, which could be a concern because that's not the way it is now. Right now, they come in from Brentwood Road. So that would be something we'd need to talk about in greater detail. And that was simply because you get a longer queue from the east. However, that may not be a desirable outcome in terms of traffic. So we're not saying that we're not aware of the fact that that has changed in this plan, and we did talk about it, but we wanted to make the point that these kind of topics may be on the table depending on what option is being discussed.
And the three-dimensional image or extruded massing of that is what you see here, that blue box being the addition for the pre-K wing. And then the site work and circulation to go along with it that Charlie was just mentioning with buses in play. This is the first new option, and I'll go kind of fast through this one. You can see we didn't put a floor plan or grade configuration change on this slide, and because it was decided to take off the plate last week or at the last meeting because of this sort of has a pretty big phasing implication. You can see in the image to the left there that we're talking about either building endpoint one is building the entire building, then demolishing the existing Lynch School, and then building the pre-K wing, or you reverse that and you just demolish the sort of center area of the Lynch and create a big opening into the existing Lynch School, and then build the entire building, the new building, into the courtyard or made free space. Move the kids into it, and then demolish the existing building. So either of those create very massive complications for site circulation and constructability and just all the tight constraints that go along with putting kids basically right hemmed in around an active construction zone. So I think that's one of the disadvantages to this scheme, and this was the phasing assumptions around that. And then, as I said, in point one just kind of shifts some of the phasing to be opposite, and when that wing gets built out, the pre-K wing gets built out into the existing building. The N2 replacement scheme, this is one that we did carry forward from the last meeting, and the important thing to note here, you can see in the graphic, both on the site plan, but also the first floor concept, that this proposal would be a school that has pre-K and K on the first floor, along with the other sort of major building spaces like the gym and the cafe, and some of the back of house and kitchen, cafe being cafeteria, and then the administration. And so the concept being that it would be broken out in terms of pre-K and K on the first floor. The second floor would be first and second grade. Then the third floor would be third, fourth, and fifth grade. And so the decision points around this iteration of choices is really thinking through grade configuration and applying some educational planning principles to these options. And so we've tried to show options that have various responses to that. And so that's what you're seeing here in this scheme. And the phasing on this one would be a little bit more simplified and have a completion date in December of 2025, which was the goal for the Lynch 2025 project that you saw on the website. And so this would be basically you build some enabling and then build a new school, move the kids in, and then demolish the existing school after that. So a site plan would look something like what you see here. Again, these are all conceptual, and so a lot of detail needs to be added to these as we get into the next phase. But you could have the entry from both sides of the site as it exists now, with substantial parking on both sides of the site. have buses with a very clear entryway and queuing scope. And then I think the hallmark of this option really ends up being this sort of center green space that radiates out from the middle of the school and creates a sort of safe learning and play zone on the south side of the school. So you get some good solar orientation and daylight, which is also the solar orientation of this site is responding in an arc-like fashion to the movements of the sun, which is a better strategy if you can accomplish that in terms of the energy efficiencies of the building. And so this scheme has some strong connections to the outdoor areas and nature. And so that's really what's driving a lot of the planning and preliminary concepts around this scheme. Three-dimensionally, this one could look like something like this. Again, a lot of work to be done on the massing side of it, but it is a 3-story school. And so it would appear a little bit larger, but I think the architecture would want to try and break itself down as it goes up and scale back if you can and create different ways of responding to the environment. But it is a 3-story building on the site. Option N3 was a 2-story building. We did not bring option N3 forward from the last meeting because I think it takes up a lot of space up on the north side of the school and is a 2-story building. And I think the committee favored the same kind of looking option, but just as a replacement school on top of the existing lynch. And so this option N4 is one that we carried forward as being the 2-story option, which would require the entire school moving off site and having one single construction phase, just go at the whole thing all at once. And so what we're seeing with this option is that you might do pre-K, K, first grade and second grade on the first floor, and then on the second floor having third, fourth, and fifth. And so that's the breakout of what we're seeing, this option being, again, 2-story building, done really cleanly, has a little bit of an earlier completion date because you're able to get at everything all at once. And then the massing of that might look like something like this if at the end of the day. So the entry would be more north facing instead of south facing. And most of the classrooms are actually going to be on the east and west facades with some exposure on the north side. So not the most sustainably focused option because you're backing yourself up to the woods, which are on the south side. N5 was a replacement school, again, 3 stories, similar to the previous option. This one has an arc related to responding to the solar orientation. But what we did was kind of move the gym more inboard and have it extend out into that wellhead property, taking up some of the topography there where there's a slight bump in the topography and then it goes back down. And so some of this gym could be a little bit buried and not have to worry about, because you don't sometimes put windows most of the time on the bottom parts of the gym. And so we can use the building to kind of retain earth in some ways. But the grade configuration we were thinking of on this one was that we could achieve pre-K on the first floor. And then the big difference between this one and the previous one was putting 3 grades on the second floor, first, second, third, and 2 grades on the third floor, which is fourth and fifth. So that grade grouping may be a little bit more advantageous, and the way that this building kind of spans out allows us to get on the second floor a good clean arc of space for 3 grades to fit above what single story space is. And so that's where we are looking at this one. Again, this one would be a sort of end of 2025 completion date. And the site plan is pretty similar to what we showed for the other arcing option, with access from both sides and the bus route and the play and the green areas. So again, just trying to connect the outdoors and nature to the building and having good orientation to the building.
One of the things we liked about this one is that we moved service to the west end, which might be a lot better from a service access point of view. Because the other previous arcing one, we had it on the north side, and this is probably a better, well, it's still shown on the north, but access is from the west, so it's probably a better outcome from a service point of view. But what we're really, with the land, as Chris said, what the landscape architect is really trying to do is create that green bridge between the building and the hill to the south, right? So that's landscape that could be taken advantage of, as well as beginning to connect the school to the north and those fields. And one of the things we heard over and over again in the visioning discussions was the desire for better connections to the landscape and for more kind of effectively utilizing the site. So one of the goals really is going to be, how do we create those kind of indoor-outdoor connections and have safe places for kids to play and have kind of engaging places for kids to learn around the landscape and the site.
Again, a massing model for 3 stories on this option here. And then the N6 option, the last option we carried forward, is slightly different than the other two, has a bit of an arc to it, but we clustered the big program elements like kitchen, cafeteria, things like that on the northwest side, poking out into the north and the wellhead protection site. The big concept arrangement here is looking at the idea of putting on the first floor, having the 3 grades on that floor instead of the other 2. So you have an option where the 3 grades are on the 3rd floor, an option where the 3 grades are on the 2nd floor, and an option where the 3 grades are on the 1st floor. And that's this one. So pre-K, K, and 1st grade on the 1st floor, 2nd and 3rd on the 2nd floor, and 4th and 5th on the 3rd floor. This would have a similar completion date at the end of 2025 as the others. And this one, if you look at the site plan really closely, you can tell that this is really scooted up about as far north as we can get to get some space between the existing building and the construction zone. But we really can't go any further into those yellow, this sort of yellow area, not the dashed lines, but the yellow underlay, because that's the velocity zone for the pond, the flood zone from the pond up to the north. So we have to stay out of that. The site plan, again, similar concepts that you've seen before, where we're trying to get this sort of green learning space to extend from north to south and really have the site kind of bisected between the two access zones from the separate neighborhoods on the east and west. And so the building really is kind of taking on some form to be able to accept the green bridge from the north all the way through to some learning space in the green play and space on the south, and then it goes through the building and then to the north learning space as it goes more into the nature landscapes. And so this site concept is similar to those other ones, but has a little bit of different queuing and bus approach. I think the bus approach on the west side on this one. And this scheme pushes back more into the north and the wellhead site. But as you can see here, it gives a lot of space between new construction and existing school, which could help with the phasing of the project. But also from the neighborhood perspective, I think it would be a little bit more up in the trees should we be able to protect a lot of those and keep them, which kind of would shield the large massing from some of the neighborhoods around to the east and west. So, and then the final option was N7, which is a replacement option way up into the north. And that just is pretty much a non-starter because of all of the jurisdictional requirements around floodplains and just the requirements about building in the wellhead space and everything else. So the committee kind of took this off. The list of constraints is exhaustive on the right. So in a nutshell, here's the options that we've carried forward from the last meeting, again, as massing models, and I'll just kind of sort through those so you can see them changing over time and how they fit. And then again, to remind you of the ones that we had X'd off last time. And I think that's all I have.
All right. Thank you very much. So we're going to open up now to the EFPBC's feedback and questions. And do we want to look at each one or start with each one and go forward from there? Or do we?
Jay, I just had a quick point of information that applied almost to everything that Charlie and Chris just shared. Can I just ask them to take a moment and share sort of for the general public when schemes that you show are some distance from the existing school, but our expectation is some measure of swing space is still required. Can you talk a little bit about that, sort of the realities of excavation, earth retention, construction equipment, laydown area, et cetera? Obviously, I think we understand when a footprint is on top of the existing ledge, but what about some of the others that Chris just shared with us? That might be helpful for people to understand for context.
So the replacement buildings that are closer to the existing lynch, you may be able to build next to the lynch, but we're building on top of existing play area. We're building on top of existing pickup and drop off. And so the fact of the matter is it would be extremely difficult to run a school, run the lynch, having displaced a large part of your pickup and drop off zones and play areas. So a number of these propose removing a section of the existing building, most typically to the east, in order to create an empty part of the site to put some parking and potentially some play, and also possibly to sort of replicate a pickup drop-off loop on the eastern end of the building. On the western end of the building, we're hoping that these new buildings, and the existing building, we're hoping we can expand the existing parking lot further westward in order to make up for the space we've displaced. So a number of them are trying to get at least 8 classrooms off site so that we can take that much off of just carve that much off of the existing building initially before we even start construction of the rest of it. So it's a partial demolition strategy. And as you mentioned, Chris, the other issue is finding laydown space for the contractor. So this contractor is going to surround the proposed replacement building in a construction fence, and they're going to go to work in there, but they need a place to put materials, they need a place to park, they need a place to stockpile soils. And there are some workarounds, of course, like asking contractors to park somewhere else. But nonetheless, they need space to at least store some materials, and we can do our best to encourage them to only deliver materials when they absolutely have to, et cetera. So there are some construction strategies. Nonetheless, you need some space. So we've been scratching our head trying to find ways of keeping the school active while this building would be built next to it. And that's why most of these include some kind of measure to remove some students from the school in order to take down part of the old school in order to be able to have some sort of parking and pick up and drop off. And then, for instance, N1 didn't even do that because we simply took the middle of the old lynch out and put a wing there. And that would be, very, very difficult, which is one of the reasons it was taken off the table, very difficult to consider how you move forward. So the fact of the matter is that if we're going to have an occupied site during construction, the replacement options that move the furthest to the north with the exception of N7 that, as Chris said, really is, I think, from a regulatory point of view and even from a resiliency point of view, is not a responsible approach. The further we move the replacement building to the north, the easier it's going to be to figure out a way for a construction project to coexist with an existing school project. In terms of the in terms of the reno, I don't think there's really much choice but to move the students, because otherwise you'd have this many phased project where you'd be doing even that, you'd have to remove the students. So I think we know we'd be removing all the students for a renovation. And then the addition renovation, we didn't feel, we felt like you'd have to move students, some students as well, if not all the students. So I don't know if that answered the question. It was kind of a long-winded answer.
Oh, that's very helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Jay?
I think Colleen's got her hand up.
Yeah, let Colleen go first.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. So it might be easier well, I guess we can stay on the slide, but so one of the things when we had discussed the new placement of the building, this is for both N2, N4, N5, and N6, is opening up the open space to the forest. And I see that a lot of the parking circulation and parking area, maybe you can go to one of the sites, I think either N2, N4, N5, or N6, the site plan. The circulation where you're showing the parking. Yeah. It's just, I see a really big swath of that open space in front of the school dedicated to parking and circulation. That's right adjacent to where most of the nature trails and things are. So I just noticed that. I wasn't sure if the program for parking was driven by any information that you got from the school, or if you were making an assumption based on square footage, how many cars in circulation. You're muted, Charlie.
I think the landscape architect did to date is just trying to come up with a plan that gives us as much parking as they thought was reasonably possible. We have not yet had that conversation, but it's not likely that the school would want much less parking than that. I mean, we have to at least have enough for staff and some visitors. It may be that could be reduced a little bit.
Or maybe it's configuration.
Yeah, I mean, these schools do end up with a fair amount of parking.
I know. Yeah, and I know that a lot of the parking right now happens along Horn Pond Brook.
Right.
One of the success. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Again, we've been talking about that green bridge. We are trying to come up with a way of at least connecting that southern landscape with the building, in a safe way.
So the other thing that I thought was successful, especially about this scheme, is the connection to the fields. So that's something I think is a linchpin. I think the fields are underutilized. It's a really great resource. And when I see, this bus route in a rather large, vehicular pathway through the rear of the site, and I know this is just one of the options. The other option, I think it's N6 that moves further north, is a bit more engaged in that field area. But I wonder, do we need this for fire access? Do we need a loop around the building?
Generally up to the jurisdiction. Okay. So we'll have to have that conversation. But this one did put the service in the back, on the north. And that was one of my earlier comments, which is we liked the ones where we actually were starting to put the service to the west, because that kept that means a lot less traffic coming around the back of the building. But the fact is, you could have a one-lane roadway back there that was blocked off at both ends with removable bollards or gates, and the only time it would be used would be by a police car or a fire truck in an emergency, at which point it's really just a glorified walking path the rest of the time. If we put service back there, it's a lot more complicated. But if it's simply requested by public safety, then, there are devices to make sure that no car ever drives back there if it's not an approved, public safety vehicle. But this one does put service back there. And the problem is, because of where the cafeteria is in this plan, we kind of needed to get back there for any kitchen delivery. I mean, it's true you don't have a full service kitchen there, but you are going to have, even if you end up with pre-prepared meals coming in, it's going to be a daily activity. So we ended up sort of liking the other schemes where we put the service on the western facade because it didn't mess so much with that back, you know.
Chris, could you flip to N6 site plan just very quickly? And I just have one more quick comment. So some of the things that I was very excited about after our last call was the idea that maybe some of, in the rear portion of the building, that the gym areas could empty out to the field. Or, I think we were saying something like there's a big rain event and the kids are playing in the field and they can quickly have access. And again, this is just, from two different perspectives. I see this car circulation in the front, and I see that there's a lot of landscape given way to areas that aren't going to be safe play around that loop. I see the play area kind of squished between vehicular circulation. So I think this is all things that can be ironed out, but programmatically, I see play is not a priority in this scheme. So there's a way for us to push back or sort of rethink creatively how we can move some of the parking or integrate that a bit. So those are my few comments.
One of the interesting things about this one, and it probably, again, so many of these, the best ideas from a lot of these diagrams ultimately can be merged, into a single preferred option. But one of the interesting things about this is they started to show this kind of learning space in to the north, right? And then there's the green space to the south. Mm-hmm. And the idea that those could potentially sort of connect through the building is a really interesting idea. So that you had this sense of this corridor that actually extended. If we could extend this site through the building from the north to the south, that could be a really sort of interesting dynamic planning idea ultimately. And so this one starts to suggest that possibility with putting that little learning circle to the north. Yeah. And obviously, again, as you say, we have a long way to go, but it's an interesting idea,
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, guys.
I have two quick questions, Charlie. I guess last time we were talking about, we barely touched upon about keeping the east and west traffic separate. I was just wondering, was there a reason that east and west side of the traffic was kept separate, not during the school session, perhaps during the off hours, that we don't create a local road that connects from Royal Street to Brentwood? That's sort of the question I was just thinking in my mind. Maybe that was the reason that was kept separate, not perhaps thinking along the, the drop-off option, but when it's all laid out, still, is that a benefit of keeping the east side separate from the west side so that, there's no local connection in the off hours and somebody playing in the playfield, and somebody trying to cut through from one side to the other side doesn't end up anything drastic. That was one of the reasons.
Right. So our thinking so far is that the whatever the final configuration and final product is, that it may be that you want to have that choice. And that the town and the district are going to want to have multiple scenarios. So it might be, for instance, in this plan, that the roadway that loops down to the south would continue through and loop back up to the other road. So there was a connection between Royal Street and Brentwood Road. However, if you didn't want to have through traffic, again, there are ways to block it off so that only a fire truck can get through it or a police cruiser can get through it. I'm quite sure that public safety will say to us, we would like to have through access. If in an emergency, if one road is blocked because a tree fell over and we have to get an ambulance in there, we're going to want to be able to get through. So we'll have to find a device to allow that to happen, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an open through road. And we were under the distinct impression that there was a lot of interest in not trying to increase traffic on either side if one side or the other suddenly was open to a free-for-all, that might be a problem. But, it could be designed any number of ways. I think what we were looking for is ultimately is some choice.
Yeah.
Some choice. So some flexibility around layout that gave ultimate choice.
Okay. My other question, the PDP that we intend to submit, it's going to include all these discussions, correct?
Correct.
Okay. We just barely touched upon resilience. Are we designing for 100-year flood or 500-year flood? Just asking.
Designing for what?
100-year flood or 500-year flood?
Just,
so we're trying. So we're trying to avoid. This plan is the plan that extends the furthest to the north, and this plan does not extend into the 100-year flood.
Okay.
So, does not extend into the 500-year floodplain. And our civil engineer, who we have a lot of confidence in, her comment was, it may be a 500-year floodplain now, but in a few years it could easily be a 100-year floodplain.
Yeah.
And that their view and our view is that from a resiliency point of view, for all kinds of reasons, we want to stay away from the 500-year floodplain as well as the 100-year floodplain.
Okay, well taken. All right, thank you.
Jay, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, go ahead.
So Chris, if you're probably in presentation mode, some members of the public were wondering if you could zoom in a little bit. So maybe if you're able to break out of that and just zoom in on this slide, might be helpful just for a moment. I had just a general, yeah, sure. I think that may be helpful for some folks a little bit. So I just want to point out that there are a number of restrictions to this water department parcel. We talked about the various environmental concerns, the fact that there are wellheads that are as yet to be decommissioned. There's also quite a lot of grade change. I think that topographic map suggests it could be actually as much as 20 feet from high to low, right along that property line that kind of bisects this wing that kind of runs from east to west. And so I wondered if you or Charlie might take a moment to talk about, and I know this isn't the only scheme that seeks to perhaps use some of that land, but could one of you just sort of speak to the opportunity as you see it to kind of take advantage of that grade change, specific, let's say, to a scheme like this with some of those larger assembly spaces? I know somebody mentioned, the potential maybe for, Colleen talked about the potential for the kids, to sort of run in from the fields, but some of these are just large volumes. And so I'm thinking about kind of comparing and contrasting this to VO, where you kind of similarly built into a hill with some of those larger spaces. I think that'd be helpful for some folks to understand. And then Jay, I just want to put in a quick plug for members of the public, the attendees who are watching. Our intent tonight was, if time permitted, to take some questions or feedback in writing. So if there are members of the public as they're watching this discussion, if you do have questions, you can go to your Q&A box and type in a question. And to the extent we can get to it tonight, we will. And if not, we'll sort of respond to that on the website. But I wonder if Chris or Charlie could just talk a little bit more about topography and design challenges and opportunities.
So I can talk briefly about it. So it's a bit of a mystery still what the topography really is out there. And the surveyors are actually actively in the field now surveying. Until they come back with some data, I think it's premature to know what we're talking about in terms of grade change. The landscape architect's comment was he didn't think it was more than 5 feet. Part of the issue is there is a significant indentation, which makes it look like a greater grade change than it may be. So we're not sure that we're talking about a huge grade change here. It may be that we find out that there is that kind of significant grade change, at which point, yes, what happened at the VO is a really good example of the kind of thing you can do. And we've done it on a number of schools, which is we have taken a volume, as Chris Blesson mentioned earlier, taken a volume that didn't need first-story windows and built it into a hill and effectively used it as a retaining wall. So that is a scenario. Another scenario is that with with not a lot of earth moving, sometimes you can really modify topography quite quickly. And if you have an indentation and you have a modest hill, sometimes you can end up with a balanced site, which is terrific, where you actually take some of that material and you use it as fill if it's suitable. And we don't know yet whether it's suitable, although all signs so far have been very encouraging around the soils out there, but we don't know that for sure. So I think it's too early to tell, but yes, I think building design strategies around retaining earth are very effective. Sometimes just modifying grade can be done in a way that works. So again, we're not sure, but the landscape architect said, if you really walk around out there, it's not really as tall as people may think it is. So I think we should know more in another couple of weeks here about where we really are with topography. And that's really going to help inform this kind of a conversation.
Thank you, Charlie.
Alec?
So we had talked about this at the last meeting, specifically related to the existing school and a partial demolition as part of the phasing in order to accommodate parking and drop-off. And I did just want to mention that while we understand that there are significant concerns potentially about splitting the student body of Lynch during the construction process, that there are ways to manage a construction site, particularly when the building is further north, such that there isn't a demolition of a portion of Lynch. However, it would potentially require some significant kind of off-site logistics management for the students. Options like remote busing, busing from a remote location for workers, staff, and potentially students, parking nearby on the streets nearby, things like that, which also carry with them their own problems. But I just wanted to mention that because it's not necessarily impossible to manage the construction of a new building without demolishing part of Lynch. It's just, it comes with its own set of problems. So there is a good conversation I think that we could have internally and with the community about, on the balance, what's the best approach? A partial demolition phasing plan that provides drop-off and parking versus a cleaner, from a construction standpoint, build, demolish, but with some additional logistics during the construction process.
I appreciate that, Mark, and I think that's right. And I think the further north we could go, if you do select a replacement option, the more likelihood that could happen. Another thing to think about is, could we have a conversation about nibbling away at some of the field to the north in order to give the contractor some laydown space, with the obvious understanding that there would be a huge downside to your community recreation department in the short term, but the possibility of rebuilding some of it in the long term and having some somewhat improved fields in the back. I don't think we would want to take all of it, but maybe some smaller portion of it might give us a little bit of area for contractor laydown. And yes, I think that, we've done buildings within 20 feet of an existing, we've done schools that are within 20 feet of an existing school. It's just tricky when it's about vehicles on a site that already has real constraints around pick up and drop off. So, but you're right. We could say there's less parking and staff parks somewhere else and gets bussed for the staff who are there all day. Obviously, some staff moves around to different schools, and so they're not applicable. But if you're in your homeroom all day, and sure, you could possibly just come in the morning and leave in the afternoon and go get your car somewhere else. A lot of other businesses work that way and successfully. So I think there are those kind of conversations to be had. It's a little bit about which option rises to the top.
They do come with a cost, though.
Yeah, I think any scenario, there is not really a scenario we're talking about that doesn't come with some associated costs. In other words, whether it's swing space off-site, whether it's coming up with a logistical way to deal with it on-site, et cetera, they all probably have a price tag that has to be applied, no doubt.
Anyone else from the EFPBC?
Yeah, Jay, could you pull up N4 briefly? So my question relates to the existing gym. I was very active in youth basketball for years. You know, the Lynch gym was a junior high school gym. So it's one of the few gyms that there's only 3 gyms of its size in the town, and one of them is the high school. So it's McCall and Lynch and the high school. And I was just this particular picture gave me the idea of, would it be possible? Could you imagine a situation where you'd separate the gym and from the, so you don't have a gym and an auditorium doing double duty, and somehow in N4 consider refurbishing the existing gym? It is by far it's used all the time by youth organizations, for volleyball, basketball, winter sports. It's one of the larger facilities of its kind in the town. And if not, I understand the reasons. There's so many other trade-offs, but it might, could it have life as a freestanding structure if it was separated, if the school moved north? Those are my 2 quick questions.
Well, you're saying build a school and the entire program north, and then have a spare gym sitting off that.
Well, if we didn't, if N4 wasn't the option,
Yeah. I suppose that could be explored. This site gets, let's just say, if you went into, I'll zoom in here. You can see that portion of the building is there.
Yeah.
And I can highlight it maybe a little bit more, but we would just,
Yeah, I understand the problems, but I guess when I saw many of your floor plans, it looked like the gym was doing double duty as auditorium in all.
Right. I think the current thinking at the moment, again, we haven't taken too deep of a dive into the educational side of it, but in the programming, and we'll have some better updates about the visioning and programming exercises we did over multiple days. It seemed to be that placing a stage, the ideal scenario is placing the stage between the gym and the cafeteria so that you could have 2 different types of spaces that serve as like a performing space with audience. And so you could have the larger space obviously being the gym, but then maybe a slightly smaller version being the cafeteria. And so that's why we've kind of been showing that the way we have.
Yeah.
But it could play out a whole number of ways. But I think,
I guess my view would be that'd be money well spent to provide the flexibility of having both the auditorium and the gym functioning at the same time. But so that's money I would spend, but it may not be money that others would spend.
But just rest assured that the proposed gym is actually larger than the pre-existing gym. So we're not reducing the size of the gym. This has come up on occasion over the years. And one of the issues too is you end up with a separate building that you have to maintain, you have to heat.
I understand. Yeah,
it's kind of a different, it becomes a second facility that you have to pay for and maintain. So it has its own set of challenges.
It's an interesting thought.
Jay, I just wanted to tack on to John Miller's question. We are adding, I believe, Charlie, we're adding space for bleachers for that gymnasium as well, are we not, in the space program?
A modest amount, yes. Not a lot of bleachers, but enough so that some parents can come and sit and watch or something.
Yeah. So I would say, John, real appreciation for how that space has been used over time. And certainly there's a history between basketball and the Lynch community, which you're probably well aware of. So there was a real interest on the part of school committee in allowing that to continue to happen with some additional space allowances that the school committee voted on last month. That's going to be submitted to the MSBA on the 18th.
Any other member questions before we open it up?
Yeah, just really quickly, not to harp on the parking and circulation, but I wonder, do we have an existing count of how many parking spaces we have on site? I see the proposed is 120. And then while you might be answering that for a minute, I just wonder if we could think about circulation either to the north or the south. If we open up access, if we think about the rear of the building maybe being a little less, emptying out into the field naturally, but having some, impervious barrier, if we could think about bus drop off or kid drop off or whatever it may be through the back of the site and try to maintain as much in the front of the site, without vehicular access and try to tuck the parking in where we can. Or if we think about the front potentially as the access point and thinking about this ring road and opening the open space here up a bit. So anyway, just food for thought. But again, I'm just coming back to the same feeling of seeing the play area maybe not as priority. So do you have a number in the spaces of what's currently there?
Charlie, do you? I don't have that handy at the moment.
I don't, not unless it's on their chart. If you zoom back out.
All right, no problem. I'll be there in the
24, 30,
morning.
18, and 48. Aren't those parking?
No, but
it may be on the, hang on, let me see if it's on the.
Right, I was wondering if they had it here.
I believe there were numbers on the parking areas.
We have that data, I just don't think we have it with us
that's
today.
fine. That's fine. Thanks.
All right. Staying on schedule, can we open up to some questions? Chris, have you received any questions we can answer?
Yeah, we have. So Krista Luce, actually on this very subject, circulation. Krista asks, do we have to keep both Brantwood and Royal Street entrances open? It seems like we might be able to consolidate the parking areas if we could only enter from one point. I would just offer, I think this is just questions about site access or something that the design team is really going to want to talk to specifically the Lynch community about. There, I think, were some strong opinions. Years ago, I've been a Lynch preschool dad twice, many moons ago. My first Lynch preschooler is about to turn 21 in a few weeks. But even back at that time, I understood that the Lynch community was concerned about that connectivity, the potential for that to be a pass-through. But years have gone by, times have changed. It's certainly an important point to talk to the community about. But Charlie or Chris, do we have to keep both entrances open? Seems like we might be able to consolidate the parking areas if we could only enter from one point. Could you maybe just speak to that from a design point of view, and then just recognizing certainly emergency responders have to get, at least 300 degrees around a building one way or the other. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say programmatically and code-wise, I don't think you have to, but there's often times that we are requested. We have another project right now where we're building a second road into the site because of having the problem of one access road onto the site can be a problem if there's some incident at the beginning and no one can get in. And so I think the notion of having access, at the very least having access from one side to the other would be something we would definitely want to keep exploring and not jettison. But I think the idea of having all parents and buses and most of your daily activity and operations come from one side or the other, and parking being heavily weighed to one side or the other, there's no programming or planning aspect to that other than preference from the community, which I think we've heard in some other meetings of the value of having access and drop off from both sides, options from both sides. And so I think it becomes a community conversation more than a code driven or requirement driven basis. And Charlie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I agree. I think public safety would tell us, first responders would tell us we absolutely want 2 entrances, and that's appropriate and smart. You don't want a school without 2 entrances. If, again, as what I said earlier, if a tree falls down, you still want to be able to get onto the site. But we have heard multiple times now that folks on the eastern side of the site feel like it would be a significant challenge to take their child via car to the western side of the site in order to enter, and I think vice versa. So we've already heard that that's not the outcome that the neighborhoods particularly want to see happen. But as Chris said, there's no reason we couldn't.
And I would just offer too a footnote. I was a pre-K parent actually with Colleen many years ago, and I recall that we don't have pre-K at Lynch today. We've had to move pre-K off-site due to rising enrollment, but the goal is to bring pre-K back. At one point many years ago, we actually had pre-K buses, and there are such things. They actually came into the Lynch site plan right, which would be sort of from the east, from the Brook side. Somewhat smaller buses, but school buses still. And it was the big yellow buses we associate with K-5 were coming in off of Pond Street. So some opportunities maybe as well there to think. We talk about bus queuing. We might even want to distinguish between K-5 and pre-K, perhaps depending upon how those elements kind of organize themselves within the building. And I know we're going to talk about that more on the 24th. Jay, I can move on. We have another question from
Yes,
public.
please.
Yeah, Steve Blank says, great to keep in mind sustainability and take advantage of the solar arc that Chris Blesson described. What would be done to ensure that they have proper cooling in the warmer months and not the issues that VO faced? I'm happy to take at least the first part of that because this came up when Tape was with us at the school committee table last month. The school committee sees the decision to not provide air conditioning at VO as a mistake that we don't want to repeat again. But we also understand and we embrace the climate action plan, the interest in a LEED certified building. At the end of the day, we want to be sure that these spaces are heated and cooled to be comfortable education and teaching spaces. And perhaps even in not just the shoulder seasons, but into the summer. We've got summer programming and so forth. So certainly, I think what that mechanical system actually looks like is something Charlie or Chris should speak to. But I appreciate Steve asking this question because when VO opened, we had a real problem on the 3rd floor, just unbearably hot, and we even had to have some people leave in an ambulance. And we went back and punched holes in the roof and provided some supplemental circulation. So we don't want to do that again. So this is something that's certainly on our radar. I wonder, Charlie or Chris, any thoughts you want to give about cooling a building mechanically in the guise of sustainable design, or is that more of a sort of a February, March discussion?
Yeah, so the systems that we're focusing in on now are highly efficient systems that can, at the very least, they condition the air. So that's, I think last time we talked about this, there was the phrase of conditioned air versus air conditioning, right? And so there's the notion that air conditioning can get you as cold as you want it. And then conditioned air being that we can treat it, temper it, take some of the humidity out of it and make it more comfortable to stay in. And I think that when we dive in deep on the systems of the building, you'll see us most likely arrive at some of these energy efficient systems that can do simultaneously heat and cool through different systems like heat pumps and things like that. And so the systems are now, because I think mostly driven by energy efficiencies, are actually able to do more for us and provide cooling at a way different impact than what we saw 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so I think we can keep sustainability in mind, keep the energy efficiencies in mind, and still provide spaces that are comfortable all year round. And I think that's what we're seeing results of in all of our schools in the last few years. So.
Thank you. Jay, we have another question from Soren. The play areas in some of the plans seem awkwardly and perhaps dangerously placed between and close to roadways, and concern there about ball play stressful or difficult or impossible. Can you just talk a little more about, maybe Chris wants to bring up a plan. Certainly this is pretty conceptual, but it's a good observation. How might Charlie or Chris react to that?
Let me go to.
I think that blue item, by the way, that's a basketball court, right? I think somebody.
Yeah, it looks like an H.
Yeah,
it looks like an H in plan, but it's a basketball court. So.
Not Swim Winchester's pool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a basketball court. You can see up there, but let me zoom out one level here. I think the simple way to answer this is that these are really like first past concepts of what could be happening. And again, the thing to take away here is that we want to strive for, as Colleen's noted, is we want to strive for some connection to the outdoors. And, maybe we haven't arrived there yet, but we also haven't spent, weeks and months trying to wrestle with the site plans for, very specific things. And so the notion of putting play out here, I think, especially in this option, you've got a lot of space between the roadways and the car pathways. On this one, there's a couple of others that have got a little bit more narrow, and we acknowledge that. But I think the notion, first of all, I think you would find that we're not going to try to stick play somewhere that it's not safe. And we would try to get creative about different ways to make safe play on sites. It's just you got to have that for an elementary school. And so yeah, I think that would be my first response. And the second response is that while play is in session for the school, if you think about it, if this is not a through road and it's just a road that's primarily used for pickup and drop off and parking, there's actually not a lot of vehicular things happening. There's the intermittent cars that would come for pickup or drop off or other things. But on school sites during the school day, when there's play, there's a whole far less amount of traffic happening. And so the after school hours, we would really need to consider those, or weekends or something like that when traffic's moving and heavy. But I think there's been a lot of play, a lot of precedent for schools that have play around major roadways or, cars or parking lots or drop-offs that is fairly safe. And some of those are projects we've done and some of them are not projects we've done, but we've seen the active results of. So I agree. We don't want to put play somewhere that's dangerous, but the notion here is less about specifically where the play block is located or the learn block is located or the cars are located on this plan, but more about the concept idea of trying to connect the building that's likely going to bisect two sections of nature. And how do we do that successfully while also providing the program for parking on both sides or the roadways through? And so that's really the concept we we're looking at, not necessarily specifically where this stuff is located yet.
And Chris, I'm just going to, for a moment, I'm going to share screen, which is going to kick you out, but then you can come right back in a moment. I just thought this was interesting to share, and we didn't say at the outset for the public. Cafe Architects were the architects for Ambrose and Vincent Owen. And so I thought this was sort of interesting. You look at the play area here off Johnson Road, the proximity to the Loop Road. One simple reality is fencing. So we have a black chain link fence here that kind of rings this area. It's open over here where you have the pickup and drop off. So some of these spaces can be pretty closely co-located so long as you build those physical barriers. And I had to go look at this real quick on Google Earth because in my mind's eye, as I drive down Johnson Road, I don't really see the fence, but it's there. So, some good options, I think.
Chris,
Yeah.
I wonder if you could also share that again and show the backside of that again, because you'd mentioned in one other meeting the intricacy of the sort of service road in the back, but it actually has basketball courts and stuff. And so when Colleen was maybe talking about the backside connection of the building, but still having emergency access, we may be able to be creative about some hard surface play on the north side of the school that is play and mostly used for that. But in the event of an emergency, access vehicles can still get around. And so we can disguise access roads as play, little chameleon effect there. So we have some creative options. So.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's a basketball hoop back here along this painted surface, and then you've got the two backboards that are getting some good use there on the back of Vincento. And I appreciate you remembering that. So thank you for that question. Yeah.
The only my thought, Chris, and both Chris, the service road at the back, hopefully we don't create a cut-through road to the public off hours from one side there. That's my concern, seeing the traffic through high school, so.
And Chris, feel free to bring up your presentation again if you want to. I did kick you out.
I mean, if it's warranted, I will. I don't know what other questions are out there. There's some in the Q&A, and then I think you guys have been getting some.
So
just to respond to that, my point earlier was if the only purpose of the road in the back, for instance, was for public safety, then that could be literally blocked off. And the only way it could be accessed would be somebody who had a key. So a cruiser would have to, either have an electronic means to raise a gate, or they'd have to get out and unlock a padlock, et cetera, et cetera. So we can make these sort of public safety service roads. If they're not delivering back there, they cannot be open to any vehicle without approval.
Agree, Chris. Charlie, I guess I'm talking about off hours when the gates are up.
I think what we were thinking is the gates would be down. During
the school
the gates
hours,
are closed all the time, 24/7, and the only time they're open is if somebody with access opens them.
So next we have former EFPBC member Neil Foley has asked, would separate access from the west be possible? Say just north of Brantwood Road, what he calls the nose on the site plan. And I'm asking Neil just to clarify, does he mean like maybe a separate bridge construction, or from the bridge, separate access point? We may have to ask him we may have to wait for a clarification from Neil on that one. He was interested in a separate access point.
From the west?
From the west.
So that's over on this side somewhere?
Oh, forgive me. Yeah.
Brantwood Road. The only thing there is a
west and I thought east. My mistake. Thank you.
That's a hill, and it's also heavily wooded.
Here.
Oh, down there. Well, we do this option in particular shows a new curb cut there to accommodate buses. So that is an option. However, it does bring more traffic onto Brantwood Road. So we have it shown both ways. Again, part of the intent is to start ultimately to have different options, not because they are necessarily recommended or not recommended, but they bring up topics to be discussed. But if you look at some of the other options on the Brantwood Road sides, there's a loop, and you're talking about way up there.
No, I'm just looking, Charlie. I don't think there's any other places to access along that side. So
that
would have to be
significant cost
from Brantwood somewhere.
Right. So my point was that this one does show a new curb cut further to the south on Brantwood as a way of using Brantwood as a way for buses to loop around.
Well, I think, Charlie, that curb cut is already there for access to the backside of
it's there for service only.
Yeah,
so only the garbage truck goes back there, food service goes back there.
Right.
Okay. Neil, if you've got other questions on circulation, if we didn't answer that, just keep plugging away with questions. Tom Hopcroft writes, in the N2, N5, and N6 options, assuming the school department picks up the well field, that is that transfer we talked about earlier, will we have landscaped areas through the currently unusable well field site to the fields? So right now there's a thicket just where Chris's cursor was. We sort of have a stand of some mature, they look like eastern white pines, right kind of below that number 39 on that topographic map. But then to the right, this changes very quickly into just kind of a thicket of what looks like a lot of Norway maples, not eastern white pine. So Tom's question is, will we have landscaped areas through the currently unusable well field site to the fields? In other words, a connection into the play fields, I think.
Right. So that's, you can see this orange arrow is like not really showing you much design, but telling you we want to try to figure out a way to make pathways or boardwalks through the woods to the play fields. And I think we showed a different option of that on one of these other ones. Let me see if I can find it. Might have been. Yeah, so this one
the further north we move, the more of the knoll we're developing, right? So part of the implication of moving the building north into that parcel is the opportunity to further develop it and further create connections between the northern soccer fields and the school and then the southern site. So it's actually one of the really interesting implications. Not only does it benefit moving away from the existing building during construction, which we talked about, but it offers that opportunity potentially to develop the north side of that site that's still below the soccer fields as outdoor play, outdoor learning, potentially if there's concerns about having a lot of play next to roadways, a place that's farther away from road, more isolated for roadways for some of the play. So I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities related to doing that. And it kind of, so, we're still in a position where we believe that as the designer, we may be charged with not touching that property, right? So no one's told us we can do this yet. However, if we could, there are some interesting possibilities relative to that part of the site. They could really, again, begin to unify north to south, unify rather a large parcel of land, but one that is obviously completely bifurcated by this parcel in the middle of it.
Well said, Charlie. So we have a few more minutes for public questions if anybody else wants to throw any others out there. Fritzy had one, which I thought was great because it's sort of a segue into the next meeting. She says, are there particular questions that you have, does the EFPBC have for the community now in making decisions that narrow the plans down? So I might just take a stab at that. As Vivian and Charlie noted at the beginning of the meeting, we're not really making any decisions tonight. We're submitting to the MSBA really all the schemes that TAP A has generated, including the ones that have been sort of taken off the table and those that are still open. We're not making any sort of preferential selection. I think a lot more conversation lies ahead of us. At the next meeting on the 24th, we're looking for a report on the visioning sessions. There were 3 visioning sessions that were held with several of the team's consultants and administration, teacher, staff, and some Lynch parents. And we may also, I think, have a conversation about some of the organizational strategies that it could impact one solution over another. So, for instance, what does Dr. Hackett think based on his input from others about organizing, a K1, a 2-3, a 4-5? Does it make sense? Where would pre-K go? Does one of the schemes Charlie showed tonight, I think a 3-floor scheme had just grades 4 and 5 on top. So I think the committee is going to hear more on the 24th about some of the organizational, let's say, preferences that might come from administration and from the superintendent. And that may, I think, help the EFPBC continue to kind of narrow the list a little bit. So I hope that answers that question. If anybody else wants to jump in on Fritzy's question. Mr. Foley did fire back, so we have one more question. Neil says, with respect to that circulation question, he says he's referring directly adjacent to Brantwood, just to its north where there's a small wood lot. So I think you were talking about that sort of that thicket, right? When you just sort of turn in off Pond Street, there's that stand of trees on the left. This might decouple the entry from the residential street. So I do think you've got some schemes I think you showed tonight that looked at developing that parcel, right, in one way, shape, or form. And that's kind of part of the canvas you're working with. Jay, I think that's all we have right now for public questions. Let me just see. Yep, that's all we have.
Okay. Any final thoughts from members before we move on?
Just one quick thing that was brought up, and I think a few parents brought up this idea of the courtyards at Lynch as treasured spaces. And I think, Charlie and Chris, in some of your schemes where there's potentially, more area between the building and the fields, in the northern position, it creates this sort of U, which I think for a lot of parents, the current play areas at Lynch aren't really protected from vehicles. So we don't really have a super safe place for kids, especially young kids, running one way, one direction or the other into the two parking areas. So the idea of creating, it might just be for younger kids, thinking about that area, that sort of protected area behind the building, emptying out into the fields as being, simulating somewhat of that courtyard area or that safe place. In the front area, maybe thinking about the older kids or something like that. But I just remember that coming up, and I know that that is a really special place for folks at Lynch. So just wanted to put that on record. Thanks.
Anyone else? No.
Can I just offer up that, Jay, this was a bit of an experiment for us tonight. The EFPBC, we typically just have a standard Zoom meeting. So we obviously wanted to be able to welcome the public and find a way to field questions. So I hope that this was successful for folks. If members of the public feel it wasn't or have any other suggestions for us, please reach out and let us know. We would certainly appreciate it. Other questions as they continue to come in, we will capture and address through the FAQ on the project website. When we, Zoom is interesting because it's a great way to reach out to people, but it doesn't replace that sort of direct connection. And when we kicked off the project with TAP A, there was certainly an expectation we'd be meeting like with the Lynch parents. And that was before we knew words like Omicron. So a lot of work really remains to be done, but done very quickly because really by mid-February, our OPM is telling us we need to be kind of focused on a preferred scheme. So I hope folks find this kind of remote style of engagement worthwhile and successful. My sense is we're going to continue to have to do it this way for a while, but there absolutely is a team interest and commitment in engaging really directly with the Lynch community and getting some of their input, as well as also leveraging some of our town staff, like Ken Pruitt's our sustainability director. He was logged on earlier tonight. He's probably still with us. A lot of good work still ahead.
Thank you, Chris. All right, we have an authorization for payment.
Yeah, we have two. We have the invoice from Hill International in the amount of $8,300, and then an invoice for TAP A Architects for $30,080.
Okay. Can we get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, second?
Second.
Who's that, Brian? Okay.
And Colleen.
All right, we'll do a roll call. Frank, Lisa,
Aye.
Yes.
Brian,
Aye.
Todd,
Aye.
Geetha,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Colleen,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
and John Miller. Are you on? Probably not in the panels, right? So skip and Don.
Aye.
All right, all in favor. And jump back to our agenda here. Next meeting will be We have the 24th. And Chris, you want to emphasize what's going on the 24th?
Yeah, just to sort of recap, we'd like to get a report on the visioning sessions are complete. So the consultant has put together some information on that. Dr. Hackett, if you want to take a moment to sort of describe what we may hear about in terms of outcome, might be good.
Sure, if I can find the unmute button. Good evening, everybody. So we did have 3 sessions with the visioning team. We had about 20 people, parents, administrators, teachers involved in that process. We had a great conversation around kind of what we love about Lynch as it is now. I heard the courtyards, colleague mentioned the courtyards earlier. That was certainly came up as part of that conversation, as well as what we were thinking about in terms of what a new Lynch could look like and kind of our reach goals in terms of program and how the building could support the program. So the 24th, we'll be able to talk to you more specifically about the education plan, which is in development right now, which will capture quite a bit of the visioning sessions that we had, as well as some other kind of more logistical details of the school itself and how it operates.
Thank you, Frank. So, and in addition to that, as I mentioned, I think we'll have some conversation about some preferences as it pertains to how certain grade elements may be organized in the building, certain key program elements, which may suggest one scheme or another is stronger or weaker. Our next meeting, of course, is going to come after the PDP deadline. So there's a lot of work that's going on that the EFPBC doesn't have its fingers in directly, and that includes, for instance, a title search. We're pulling together deed documents, not only on the parcel that we know we have, but we're also trying to do a lot of work and really appreciate Meg White sort of writing herd on this through legal counsel, but trying to pull together all sorts of legal documents that describe that wellfield parcel that we're interested in. We have made clear to both management and the select board, the school committee's interest in a land transfer. So it's possible that by the 24th, there may be an update on that as well in terms of next steps or conversations. I think it would be terrific to reach an agreement between the two boards, let's say in February. By the end of February, management is already beginning to pull together the warrant for spring town meeting. So this is, I think we can all appreciate tonight some of the schemes that were presented that are really kind of compelling, pretty substantially rely on some element of that land. So as I said earlier, the MSBA is not going to vote to go forward with us on a project that sits on land that we don't have. So this is becoming kind of a critical path item. And I think that's it. Maybe an update on survey from Charlie. I don't know if Charlie or Vivian want to chime in any other items that we anticipate. Oh, there is one other item I think we should talk about on the 24th, and that is what sort of subcommittees we think are really going to be necessary. I know there's a strong interest in sort of sustainability, building systems. We should talk a little more about that and how that can kind of plug into the process because there's sort of a sustainability scorecard that I think is an element of the PSR. So we definitely want to get ready to make progress on that as well with everybody who's interested. I don't know if Vivian or Charlie have anything to add, if I've left anything off. I think it'll be a pretty long meeting. And then I think we're planning on meeting again on the 31st as well, right?
Right. And we may be meeting depending on either the 7th after the select board meeting, if they meet earlier, or we may have to meet on the 9th. We'll see how the 31st goes first.
Charlie would prefer the 7th.
He'd prefer the 31st, I think, right? Ahead of time?
Oh,
yeah.
I was just suggesting that we want to continue to do the committee needs to continue to do the work of narrowing in on a preferred approach because we are ultimately this PSR submission is going to go to the MSBA in early March. So that really is only giving us the month of February to develop it appropriately. So the sooner that the committee has some comfort level around approach, the better off for the process. So if it's the 31st, that's great. If it's the 7th, so be it. But we're going to have to have our kind of our ducks in a row around a preferred option pretty short order. So I think that this meeting on the 24th is going to be is going to be great because it really is the crux of the sort of, I think Dr. Hackett's description of the educational plan is going to be really important, how the district sees this building supporting the district's vision for education is going to be really key, and it may help inform this conversation as well.
Okay.
No
Anyone have anything
question.
else?
Sorry, no question, because a lot of things to pull before the 18th. With the PDP, do they have to form the cost too for all the options that are going in?
We're going to be providing, for the submission that's going in on the 18th, we're going to be providing some very conceptual project cost targets. So there'll be ranges.
Yeah.
And they're just going to give a general kind of cost. It's really for purposes of comparison between options.
You don't think MSBA would sit on that, correct?
What do you mean sit on it?
In other words, just pulling together, everything before the 18th, would that be something feasible, or we can buy some time for the cost for the?
Oh, I think we have to have this submit the PDP submission. Yeah. Well, we're talking about two different things. This PDP submission is going in on January 18th. Yes. Absolutely. We're committed to doing that. Yes. And we also have committed fully to having the next submission, the PSR, to them on March 3rd. That's a non-negotiable date as far as they're concerned. So we have to meet that date.
So my question was, the PDP would be submitted on the 18th, and does that need to go with the cost that we think that would be, what would be like? And then we are expecting review comments back from the MSP on that PDP submission, correct? Once
right.
We answer all the, okay.
So the answer is yes, there will be conceptual concept costs that go in with the PDP, but they really are simply kind of comparative range costs. They really aren't something that anyone is committing to. And then in terms of comments, if experience holds, the comments we'll get back from the MSBA, whenever we get them back, will most likely be very focused on the educational plan and the space template. So they're not going to, in other words, there's probably not going to be a comment that comes back from the MSBA that would fundamentally impact on the preferred option. Okay. It will impact on the district needing to clarify and explain their request or why something is in the educational program. It may require us to further explain why the space template has a certain number of rooms. But really, again, as we've been saying all along, this initial phase is really, in terms of the MSBA's view, is most definitively focused on educational planning. And that's going to be where most of their comments are. So I don't think we're going to have something where they throw us a curveball in terms of what the committee ultimately believes the right direction for the project is. It's simply going to be them saying, well, we don't know if you should have that many classrooms, or tell us why you're going to staff this room, or that kind of thing. And those we can answer when we get their comments back.
Okay. All right.
Charlie, I have a question. When you get to the PSR, how conceptual are the mechanical MEP systems? Or do we have a chance to change that further along in the actual schematic design?
So the PSR, the MSBA asks for systems narratives at the PSR. So we don't do any drawing. We don't do any true design. However, the engineers will write up conceptual, and I think Chris Nixon mentioned this. They will be writing systems narratives around a proposed system. So to the degree that ultimately that changes, that could change. We're not committing to anything, but they are expecting that that there will be written narratives for each kind of system. And it's pretty straightforward. It's important for mechanical, but I mean, for instance, fire protection. A fire protection system is a fire protection system, right? They want to know that somebody's thought about it, but it isn't going to be particularly significant. However, mechanical will be a bigger, more significant document.
Right, that's what I was getting at.
Yep, but it's certainly, we're not fully committed to it. It's a preliminary narrative.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Jay, in terms of the sustainability subcommittee, how we can best be, one, I'm sort of new to forming this committee, so I don't know if there's anything formal we need to vote on in order for it to be a real committee. And secondly, how we can support the project, especially that Todd was asking about MEP systems and things like that, how we provide feedback that's also I would say, in support of the rest of the committee as well.
So we do need to form the committee, which would, like Chris mentioned, we're going to touch on it on the 24th.
Okay.
It does need a chair. We'll need meeting minutes. It's a subcommittee. I know that there's already been interest from our members. We'll reach out to Ken Pruitt to be on it, representing the town. And also I'll reach out to either Chris or Peter Lawson and see if either one of them want to be on it. That's what it was last time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Just to have some input and then go off on your own and report back to the committee. Meeting with Charlie's mechanical team from TAP
Of
A
course,
too. Yeah.
Right. So I think the two pieces of work that would happen in the PSR would be a review of the narratives, the systems narratives, and then a review of a preliminary lead scorecard. Those are the two things. We don't get any farther along than that, but those two things. And then obviously schematic design is a much more robust discussion.
So we do schedule on more time on the 24th to address this.
Sounds good.
Tonight was pretty, crammed a lot in tonight.
We did. Jay, I'm glad Todd asked this question because it reminded me of something. And Vivian, I'm going into some weeds here, but we were looking to get some information from you on the feasibility study costs for evaluating geothermal at Swampscott. I don't know if you were able to get that information to us yet. Colleen is not the only one I think who's expressed some interest, and I think it's worth at least talking about and exploring. I realize certain site development options may sort of help or hinder a geothermal option, either in whole or in part. I mean, I don't know if the committee is aware of this. I think Hill has some experience with some school projects where there may be either a larger or smaller geothermal system, but that may still be something worth exploring. And we should be I think if we're interested in geothermal and we want to understand if that's even an option, we have to begin to crack that before we submit the PSR, or at least make some expression of interest. Would you not agree, Charlie?
Well, I think as we've discussed, we can probably do a systems narrative that can be plugged into by either solar or geothermal, as on-site generation of energy, right? So then, but obviously cost is going to be a significant driver. So.
Right. And based on the Swampscott project that we recently submitted and approved and is now in the DD phase, close to approximately 160 wells at 500 feet deep is roughly $16,000 per well, leading up to a little over $2.5 million. And as far as the analysis for the study, that we'd have to go through the geotech, and they can definitely give us pricing for this in particular project.
Yeah, I mean, it may be help if you're able to pull up the fee component at Swampscott that pertain to that, Vivian, just for analysis might be helpful as a benchmark. But I mean, Jay, I don't know if we can table this more till the 24th, but I just want to be clear. I sort of second Colleen's interest in geothermal. I think it's something we should at least be talking about and potentially exploring. And, I know it won't be cheap, but, when you sort of amortize this over the life of the building, it might make sense.
Right. I do recall this question previously, Chris, and I had looked through. Unfortunately, the geothermal study was done under the architectural team, so I don't have a benchmark. I wasn't able to obtain.
I can try to get some numbers, Vivian. We're doing geothermal on probably 4 or 5 of the school projects I'm working on right now. Mm-hmm. So, Chris, you're thinking of the soft costs.
Yes.
right,
Right.
of doing the evaluation. Sure,
Yeah,
I'll see
right.
what I can get.
That'd be great.
Right. Yeah, just because we're early, we're in feasibility. And
Yeah.
so if we're really going to think about this, we got to be sure we have the right sort of people and the time dedicated to evaluating it and helping us make some decisions. Yeah.
Colleen, that would be helpful because on
Yep.
my end, I have a lot more of the hard costs, but I don't have the soft costs.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you,
Anyone
Jay.
else? All right. I think it was well done tonight. We got the public involved, and I'm sure there'll be more questions coming in, but the website is great. And call it a night. Get a motion to
We're getting
adjourn.
a lot of positive feedback in Q&A. Folks just
Good.
seem to think this format worked really well tonight, Jay. So I'm happy to hear that, and appreciate everybody's patience with us in making it work.
Thank you,
All
everyone.
right.
Good job, Chris. Great
Like
job.
a motion to adjourn?
Yes, please.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right. Roll call. Frank?
Aye.
Lisa?
Yes.
Brian?
Aye.
Todd?
Aye.
Geetha?
Aye.
John? Colleen?
I
Chris already. Mark? You second. So Don?
Aye.
All right. We're 8:05. Ahead
Thanks,
of
everybody.
schedule.
Yeah, well, good job.
Have a
Thanks,
good night.
everybody.
Good job.
Good job.
Nice meeting.
And have a great week.
take care,
Have a good
everyone.
night.
You too.
Andrew Marin, thank you very much for your help tonight.
Yes.
Went very
Nice
well.
job
Right.
tonight.
We'll see you guys again soon, okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good night.